Silas Thorne was a man who lived by the clock of the seasons, not the world of men, high in the jagged teeth of the Nevada high desert. He had a cabin that smelled of old cedar and the ghost of wood smoke that never quite left the rafters. He'd been there 7 years, long enough for the town of Blackwater to forget his face, long enough for the blood on his hands to dry into the kind of crusty memory that only itches when the wind blows from the east. He was 56, but in the mountain light, he looked 70. His skin was like a topographical map of a hard life. Deep canyons at the corners of his eyes, a ridge of a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He didn't talk to the trees, and he didn't talk to the sky. Silence was his only friend, and Silas Thorne liked it that way. But silence is a fragile thing. It broke on a Tuesday. The sun was dipping low, painting the sagebrush in shades of bruised purple and dying gold. Silas was out back, splitting pine. Thwack. The rhythm was steady. Thwack. Heartbeat of the axe. Then the wind shifted. It carried something that didn't belong in the high country. Not the scent of a cougar. Not the musk of a mule deer. It was a smell of lavender and copper, perfume and blood. Silas didn't reach for his axe. He reached for the Winchester leaning against the porch rail. He didn't lever around yet. He just waited. A man who spent time in the dark knows that if you wait long enough, the shadows always tell the truth. Out of the treeline she came. She wasn't walking. She was stumbling, her feet dragging through the alkali dust like they were made of lead. She was wearing a dress of silk, thin, tattered, a deep emerald green that looked violent against the gray desert. One sleeve was torn away, revealing a shoulder that was a road map of purple welts. She saw him. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stopped, her breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. Her eyes were the color of a winter lake, cold, deep, and full of a knowledge that no young woman should have. She took one more step. Her knees buckled, and the desert swallowed her whole. Silas didn't move for a long time. Caution is a habit that keeps you alive when your past is a graveyard. But then he saw the way her hand was clutched at her side, the silk turning a dark, wet black. He sighed. It was the sound of a man watching his piece burn down. He carried her inside. She was light, too light, like a bird with broken wings. He laid her on the long table he'd built with his own calloused hands. He didn't light a lamp yet. He didn't want to draw eyes from a valley. Instead, he worked by the low orange glow of the hearth. He cut the silk away. It wasn't just a wound. It was a brand, a mark on her hip, fresh and angry. The initials E.V. Silas felt a coldness settle in his marrow that had nothing to do with the Nevada winter. He knew those initials. Everyone in the territory knew Elias Vance, the man who owned the banks, the law, and the souls of anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. Silas worked in a focused, grim silence. He boiled water. He tore clean linen. He used the last of his good whiskey to clean the gash. When the alcohol hit the raw meat, she didn't wake up, but her body arched off the table, a low, animal whimper escaping her cracked lips. "Steady," Silas whispered. It was the first word he'd spoken in 3 weeks. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a tin cup. He stitched her up with a bone needle and silk thread. His hands, usually so good at destruction, were surprisingly gentle. He cleaned the dust from her face. She was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like a polished blade. Later that night, he sat in his rocking chair, the Winchester across his lap. He watched the door. He watched the window. And every once in a while, he watched her. She stirred around midnight. Her eyes snapped open. No confusion. No, where am I? Just a sharp, predatory focus. She looked at Silas. She looked at the gun. She looked at the bandages. "You're a long way from a valley," Silas said. She didn't answer. She just pulled the moth-eaten wool blanket up to her chin, her knuckles white. "Vance's men?" he asked. She nodded once. "Short, sharp. They'll come," she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves on a grave. "They don't like losing property." Silas leaned back, the chair creaking. "Out here, the only property a man has is what he can bury in the dirt. Go to sleep." 3 days passed. The kind of days where the sun seems to stall in the sky. She told him her name was Mara. She didn't tell him how she'd ended up in Elias Vance's collection, and Silas didn't ask. He knew how it went. A debt unpaid, a father's mistake, a girl sold to cover the cost of a bad harvest. The West didn't care about fair play. They lived like two people waiting for a lightning strike. He watched her watch him. She studied the way he cleaned his rifle. She studied the way he sat with his back to the wall. She studied the scars on his arms, the ones that didn't come from ranch work, the puckered holes from small caliber rounds, the long, thin lines from Bowie knives. "You aren't a rancher," she said one afternoon. He was whittling a piece of cedar on the porch. "I have a ranch," Silas replied without looking up. "I have cows. I have land. That makes me a rancher." "A rancher knows how to fix a fence," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "You fix that fence like you're building a fortification. You check the horizon every 10 minutes. You sleep with your boots on." Silas stopped carving. The sliver of wood fell to the porch. "Observations like that can get a person in trouble, Mara." "I'm already in trouble," she said. She stepped closer. The wind caught her hair, blowing it across her face. "I saw a man like you once. In San Francisco. He was a regulator. A man who got paid to make people disappear. He had the same eyes as you. Eyes that have stopped looking for heaven." Silas stood up. He was a head taller than her, a wall of iron and sun-beaten leather. "Whatever I was, I'm a man who's giving you a place to bleed in peace. Don't push it." He went to the barn. He stayed there until the moon was high. He didn't like the way she looked at him. It was like she was peeling back the layers of skin he'd grown over his soul. "Now, before we get to the moment that changed everything, I want to take a second and ask you, who do you think Silas Thorne really is? Is he a man seeking redemption? Or is he just a monster hiding in the hills? I want to know your answers in the comment section. If you're still here listening to this story with me, pour yourself a fresh cup of tea or coffee. Sit back and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? I love reading where these stories travel to. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. The real storm is just about to break over Silas's cabin. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the past finally catches up. Let's get back to the Nevada high country. The fifth night was the coldest. A frost had moved in, silvering the sagebrush and making the cabin walls groan. Silas was sitting by the fire, oiling his gun belt. The leather was old, supple, and dark with the sweat of a dozen years of hard riding. Mara was sitting across from him, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of water. The firelight danced in her eyes, making them look like embers. "I know why you're up here, Silas," she said softly. Silas didn't stop oiling the leather. "I told you, the air is clean." "No," she said. She stood up, her movement fluid, almost spectral. She walked around the table until she was standing right beside his chair. Silas could smell her now, that lavender and copper. It was a haunting scent. She leaned down, her lips inches from his ear. The world outside seemed to stop. The wind died. The fires stopped popping. "I know what you do in the dark," she whispered. Silas froze. The oilcloth stopped moving. His heart didn't just skip. It felt like it hit a wall. That phrase, those exact words. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "I know about the nightmare of Nogales." Her voice steady as a heartbeat. "I know about the town that burned because one man decided the law wasn't fast enough. I know about the 3 brothers you buried in a single trench while the moon was hidden. They called you the shadow of the Pinkertons. The man who did the things the law was too afraid to do." Silas's heart was thundering now. He felt a cold sweat break across his brow. He hadn't heard that name in a decade. He'd buried Silas, the executioner. He'd killed him. "Who are you?" Silas asked. He reached for his belt, not to put it on, but his hand moved by instinct toward the heavy Colt .45 that sat in the holster. Mara didn't flinch. She didn't back away from the weapon. Instead, she reached out and placed her small, cold hand over his. "I'm the girl who was hiding under the floorboards in Nogales," she whispered. "I'm the one you didn't see. I watched you walk through the fire. I watched you save everyone who mattered. and then I watched you disappear into the smoke like you were part of it." Silas looked up at her. The tough, wet exterior he'd spent 7 years building crumbled. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was a man in the dark again. "I didn't save everyone," Silas said, his voice breaking. "You saved me," she said. "And now, the man who's coming for me, Elias Vance. He's the one who paid for fire in Nogales. He's the one who sent those men. He's been looking for the girl who saw his face, and he's been looking for the shadow who cost him his fortune." Silas stood up, his hand finally gripping the belt. He didn't draw the gun. He buckled the leather around his waist. It felt heavy. It felt right, like a man putting on his own skin. "How far behind you are they?" Silas asked. Mara looked at the door. "They found my trail at the creek. They'll be here by dawn." Silas nodded. He went to the corner of the room and pulled up a loose floorboard. He reached in and pulled out a long, heavy canvas roll. He spread it on the table. Inside were 3 more pistols, a box of silver-tipped rounds, and a Bowie knife with a handle made of human bone. "Then we'd better get to work," Silas said. "I've spent 7 years trying to live in the light. It's time I went back to the dark." The dawn didn't bring light. It brought a thick, gray fog that clung to the canyon floor like a shroud. Silas was on the porch. He wasn't sitting. He was standing, the Winchester held loosely in the crook of his arm. He'd put on his old black duster, the one that made him look like a piece of the night that had refused to fade. The sound of hooves came first. Not 1, not 2, 5. 5 riders emerged from the fog like ghosts. They were dressed in expensive wool and high-grade leather. The men of the valley. In the center was a man on a white horse. Elias Vance. Vance was a man of 60, with a face like a hawk and a smile that never reached his eyes. He pulled his horse to a stop 20 yards from the porch. "Thorne," Vance called out. His voice was cultured, smooth, the voice of a man who bought and sold lives over tea. "I must say I'm impressed. I looked for you in Mexico. I looked for you in the territory. I never thought to look in a shack in the clouds." Silas didn't move. "You found me, Elias. Now what?" "I want the girl," Vance said, gesturing with a gloved hand. "She's a thief. She took something of mine. A ledger. Information that doesn't belong in the hands of the public." "She's not a thief," Silas said. "She's a witness. There's a difference." Vance's smile faded. The 4 men with him shifted in their saddles. Their hands moved toward their holsters. "You're a dead man, Silas," Vance said. "You were a legend once, but look at you. You're old. You're slow. You spent too much time whittling wood and dreaming of peace. My men are young. They're fast." Silas took a step down from the porch. The fog swirled around his boots. "You're right, Elias," Silas said. "I am old, and I am slow. But here's the thing about a man who's lived in the dark as long as I have." The Winchester roared 3 times before Vance's men could even clear leather. The first rider was blown backward out of his saddle. The second took a round to the chest and slumped over his horse's mane. The third's horse spooked as a bullet grazed its ear, sending the rider tumbling into the dirt. Silas didn't stop. He dropped the rifle. It was empty, and drew the Colt from his belt. The 4th rider managed to get a shot off. The bullet tore through the meat of Silas's shoulder, spinning him around. Silas didn't flinch. He planted his feet, leveled to .45, and fired once. The rider's head snapped back, and the fog turned red. Vance was the only one left. He was fumbling with a small, gold-plated derringer, his face pale, his hawk-like features twisted in terror. Silas walked toward him. He didn't run. He just kept coming, a slow, unstoppable force of nature. "I told you, Elias," Silas said, his voice a low, vibrating hum. "I know what I do in the dark. I do the things you can't buy your way out of." Vance fired the derringer. The small round whistled past Silas's ear. Silas reached the white horse. He grabbed the bridle with one hand and pulled Vance out of the saddle with the other. He slammed the banker into the alkali dust. Silas stood over him. The barrel of the Colt pressed against Vance's forehead. "The ledger," Silas said. "Mara has it, and it's going to the federal marshal in Carson City, along with the story of Nogales." You can't." Vance wheezed. You're a killer, Silas. You're just like me. No, Silas said. He leaned down, his eyes cold and empty as the desert night. I'm the man who kills people like you. That's the difference. Silas didn't pull the trigger. He hit Vance with a bit of gun, knocking him into a deep, dark silence. The sun finally broke through the fog an hour later. Silas and Mara stood at the edge of the ridge. Looking down at the valley, Vance and his surviving men were tied to their horses. Heading toward the town under the watchful eye of a local sheriff, Silas had signaled with a smoke fire. The ledger was tucked into Silas's saddlebag. You're leaving, Mara said. It wasn't a question. I can't stay here, Silas said. He was leaning against his horse, his shoulder bandaged again. The silence is gone. Once people know you're alive, they never stop coming. Mara looked at him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of cedar. It was the one Silas had been whittling. He'd carved it into the shape of a bird. A hawk. Where will you go? She asked. Further west, Silas said, where the shadows are deeper. He looked at her for the first time in 7 years. He didn't look like a man with a secret. He looked like a man who had accepted who he was. You could come, he said. Mara smiled. It was a small, crooked thing, but it was real. I think I've had enough of the dark for a while. Silas, I want to see what the sun feels like without a brand on my hip. Silas nodded. He understood. He climbed into his saddle, the leather creaking a familiar song. Take the cabin, he said. The coffee's in the tin. The wood's already split. He turned his horse and began the long ride down the backside of the mountain. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He could feel her watching him, a silent witness to a man who had finally stopped running from himself. Sometimes, the things we do in the dark are the only things that allow us to live in the light. Silas Thorne spent his life as a monster, so that people like Mara didn't have to. If this story touched you, if you felt the chill of that Nevada wind, do me a favor. Tap that like button. It helps more than you know. And I want to leave you with one final thought. If someone from your past arrived at your door today, would you reach for your belt or would you keep the door closed? 'Cause out here in the West, the past isn't just a memory. It's a ghost that's always hungry. Thanks for riding with me today. Hit subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the Wild West. Until next time, keep your back to the wall and your eyes on the horizon.